In a previous video, I talked about how all equilibrium ice calculations are essentially the same, at least for simple calculations, which I would say are things that only have one step and don't have anything to do with the common ion effect. And the more complicated ones are still done the same way, it's just a few more steps. So what I want to do real quickly, though, is talk about one of the tools that I use to speed things up, and that tool is the TI calculator solver function. And they have it in the TI Inspire and everything else. It's different syntax for that. But I can at least look at the TI solver function for the 84 and 83 and stuff like that. And I've written out some simple steps here in advance. And I know it doesn't look super simple, but I'll run through that in general, and then we'll take a look at that example right there, and we'll do some calculating. All of the simple ice problems end up being second-order polynomials, and if you wanted to back in the day, you could use the quadratic equation to do that, and luckily we don't have to. And I will point out that there's a simplification that a lot of people use, or a lot of people teach. I don't bother with it because we've got calculators, but the simplification ends up being in this step right here, where it's the initial concentration minus the amount that dissociates, and then a lot of times they'll assume the amount that dissociates doesn't matter, and then you have a much simpler equation to solve. We're not going to do that because we have a program called Solver that'll do it for us. So I'm going to grab this calculator and set it up on something right here, actually, because it doesn't matter if you can see very well. And here's how it works. So I put these instructions. We're going to start out with the math button. I tried to box in things that are buttons. So the math button's right there, math. And then I'm going to hit up. And it is the bottom one. On this case, for this calculator, it's B, but it really depends on what your calculator has in terms of functions. But it's almost always the last one. So if you just hit up, you'll get to solver. And then a screen will pop up. And usually it'll be like this, which is the secondary screen. So a lot of times you'll have to go up. And now it gives you equation solver of the form 0 equals some expression. And I know that looks really intimidating, especially if you don't like math. But I wrote that over here, 0 equals some expression, right? So in the actual ice problems, I do want to mention, generally you'll have them solved so that you have your k value equals that expression. And so there'll be a little rearranging involved. Now the other option would be in the newer operating systems for the TI calculators, and I'm going to scoot this over, and I don't have one handy, but I do have this emulator on my phone, my spare phone, and just so I can show you, we've got math, and I'll go up just like I did, and then I'm going to choose solver, and then you get a screen that looks like this. And what they're asking for is equation 1 and equation 2, and what you'd put in there is one side of your equality, which would be your Ka value, and then the other side of your equality, which would be the expression. So these two screens are essentially asking for the same thing. It's just that the calculator on the right wants you to solve it in the form of 0 equals, and the calculator on the left lets you divide it up into two expressions. And again, this is a later operating system, and I don't have one of those calculators with me at home right now, but I use this all the time, and after this step they're the same anyway. So we are right here. We have an expression of the form x squared over something minus Ka, and we'll look at that in more detail. But for right now, there it is. In this case, I have x squared over something minus my Ka value. It's actually the problem I'm going to do over here. And I do want to point out the first major thing to watch out for, and that is putting parentheses around your denominator. As I watch people punching these in class, the number one thing I notice, or the number one place people go wrong, is forgetting the parentheses around that denominator. So it evaluates that expression with that in the denominator. So keep that in mind. Once you've entered your expression like this, I said go ahead and hit the enter key, and you'll end up with a screen that looks like this, rather confusing perhaps. And this is another key step that people forget. Set your x value to 0. And what you're doing is you're telling your calculator where to guess, essentially. So you're looking for intercepts or whatever, that's the solution to the equations. So we're going to guess for our x equals 0 there, and then you hit the alpha key. So you hit the alpha key, and then you're going to choose enter, and alpha enter, if you look closely, is solve. So if I hit alpha then enter, it gives me a value. Oops, alpha enter, it gives me a value. That value happens to be 0.0172 or whatever. I do want to point out that sometimes you'll see a number, like maybe this one would have been 1.7, and if you're not careful, you might miss that down at the end they'll have a times 10 to the, because it's a number that's small enough that they don't want to put it in that notation. They'll use scientific notation. At this point, you can quit out of it. We've already solved it. And the convenient thing is the variable x is now the location of that solution. So x is that number that we just used, which makes our ice calculations super quick. So let's run through that again, start to finish super quickly. The first thing we're going to do, hit that math key, then go ahead and hit up so you get to solver, hit enter. It'll give you this screen right here, which is the solution screen. You probably want to hit up to go back to that screen where you're punching in an equation in this operating system of the form 0 equals some stuff minus something else. In the newer operating systems, you got two separate boxes, and you don't have to do subtraction. You just put your Ka in one and your equation in the other. And it doesn't matter which goes in which. So I've got my expression there. I'm going to hit enter. And now I've got x equals something. I have to remember this x equals 0 to start out. And then I will hit alpha and enter. And we've got a value. And I'm done with this screen if I want to be. Hit second quit. And now every single time you use x, it is that value. And we can save a lot of time doing it this way.